Now we come to the operation called prepositioning. Locate the index and pawl jewels through the cell hatch. See if the index and pawl jewels are centered and perpendicular to the wheel. In this way, the jewels will lay flat on the edge of the wheel and thus fit the teeth of the index wheel squarely. If the jewels are not perpendicular, they will not fit the teeth squarely and have a tendency to skip over the teeth. If they are not centered, they will fall off the edge of the wheel when the watch is bumped or dropped. The watch will stop operating if either jewel is off the edge of the wheel. To center the index jewel, correct it by placing the index post wrench over the post. Gently stress the post wrench in the direction needed to raise or lower the jewel in relation to the edge of the index wheel. To center the pawl jewel, use the fork end of the homemade pushing tool. Push the post in the direction necessary so that the jewel is centered on the edge of the wheel. This model of the indexing system will help us understand what we are about to do. To correct the perpendicularity or tilt of the jewels, a fine hairspring tweezer is used to twist the fingers as near as possible to the post. The finger is the name given to a very fine hairspring-like flat wire to which the index and pawl jewels are attached by a special epoxy cement. The index and pawl jewels must also fit the cut of the teeth on the index wheel. The jewels should be straight with the finger, not tipped downward, which is called toe in, nor tipped upward, which is called toe out. To make correction on either jewel, grasp the finger near the jewel, but not the jewel itself. Grasping the jewel risks major damage to it. With a sharpened piece of pegwood, apply pressure to the jewel to make the desired correction. It is extremely important that the fingers are straight under tension. When the jewel is on the wheel, there must be tension or pressure on the fingers and jewels against the index wheel. Otherwise, they would leave the wheel during a bump or shock, thus skipping teeth and falling behind time. How can we measure the pressure to be applied on each of the fingers? First, with the index jewel up off the index wheel, there should be a slight downward curve on the finger, approximately 1/2 to 1 thickness of the jewel. When the jewel is applied to the wheel with the proper pressure, the finger will straighten out the curve which you had put into it when it was off the wheel. How can we measure this tension? By a process called drop-off. Assuming that the fingers and jewels are straight and the jewels are centered on the index wheel, we are ready to start counting drop-off. The pawl jewel should be resting on the index wheel to hold it from backing up. If it isn't, loosen the lock screw, turn the pawl adjusting cam until the pawl jewel engages the index wheel, then tighten the lock screw. With the movement under the microscope, watch the index jewel while placing a sharpened pegwood into the left cup, the one attached to the tine that carries the index post. Move the cup toward the center of the movement. Count the number of teeth contacted by the index jewel before it comes off the index wheel. The jewel should jump between 5 and 8 teeth before it comes off the wheel. If it comes off sooner, you must bend the finger towards the wheel to add more tension. If it does not come off after 8 teeth, the finger must be bent away from the index wheel to reduce the tension. 6 or 7 tooth drop-off is ideal. The finger should be perfectly straight when you have the correct tension. Some movements you cannot move the fork far enough with the pegwood to jump 5 teeth before the fork reaches the bumper blocks. This is called early bottoming, as in this case it only jumped 3 teeth. In a case like this, you must take a good guess and estimate that the jewel would come off in that distance if you could have moved the fork far enough. If you have too much tension, your microamp reading on the meter will be higher than allowable, and you must readjust the tension. If not enough tension, the meter will be low and you must readjust because the jewel would be leaving the wheel at any bump or shock. After the index jewel tension is properly adjusted, the pawl finger and jewel must be adjusted. Loosen the pawl bridge locking screw again and turn the adjusting cam till the pawl bridge and the pawl jewel is at its highest point. Then tighten the lock screw. Now the pawl jewel should be off the wheel and the pawl finger should have a slight downward curve. The pawl jewel should be away from the wheel, but by only half the thickness of the jewel, no more and no less. There might be a time that you would need to go into third phase. You could not do this if the pawl jewel positioning was more than 1/2 the thickness away from the wheel. This must be observed under a microscope. A 10-power loop is not good enough to make all the adjustments and corrections to the indexing system. If the pawl jewel is too close to the wheel or too far away, you will not be able to get into the proper tension and it would be impossible to phase it into second phase. Second phase is a way we set the proper tension on the pawl finger. You will notice that there are also coming out of the index and pawl post a short piece of metal above the finger. These are called stress limiters or bumpers, or sometimes called shock absorbers. They limit the distance the index or pawl fingers are allowed to bend away from the index wheel during a bump or shock. The first models of the 214 did not have them up to 1964. Bulova suggests you put them into the watch by putting in a new fork and pawl bridge equipped with stress limiters. The stress limiter should rise from the post at a steady angle. The end of the stress limiter should be about 3 thicknesses of the stress limiter away from the finger. The base of the limiter should not touch the finger for more than 1/3 the length of the limiter. If adjustment is necessary, a fine tweezer can bend them. They are made of soft metal and can be adjusted easily. If the limiter has kinks and bends in it, bend it away to get yourself some working room, straighten it, and then bend it back to where it should be. Now that you have adjusted and pre-positioned the indexing mechanism, it is time to phase the movements. Phasing means adjusting the index and pawl jewels in relation to the teeth on the index wheel. Let me explain the theory and sequence of phasing on an Accutron. When the coils are energized, they make the fork vibrate back and forth. This is called amplitude. The distance the fork moves the index jewel in proper operation is equal to the space of 2 teeth on the index wheel. Let me explain the sequence of operation on this model. In a properly phased movement, with the fork at rest, the index jewel will be resting in the middle of one tooth while the pawl jewel is holding against another. Now let's apply power to the fork. As the fork moves from center back a distance equal to 1 tooth, the index jewel first drops off the tooth it was centered on. It continues back a 1/2 tooth more to complete its 1 tooth of backward travel. The index jewel immediately starts forward. From this position, its 2 tooth distance of forward travel or amplitude. The jewel slides forward 1/2 the tooth it was resting on until it engages a tooth ahead of it. It continues forward and pushes the index wheel ahead, the remaining 1 1/2 teeth distance of forward amplitude. As the index wheel moves forward, the pawl jewel drops off the tooth it was resting on onto the next tooth. The wheel continues to move forward another 1/2 tooth while the index jewel completes its 2 teeth distance of forward amplitude. The pawl jewel is now in the center of the tooth it was dropped onto. The fork stops and begins its backward stroke. The pressure or tension of the index finger recoils or draws back the index wheel, the half tooth it was over pushed, until the pawl jewel engages the tooth ahead of it and stops it. The fork continues with its remaining 1 1/2 teeth of backward movement. In doing so, the index jewel drops off the tooth it was on and slides another 1/2 tooth for a total of 2 teeth of backward amplitude. The fork now moves forward again to begin a new cycle. The same sequence is repeated 360 times a second. Now let us get ready to phase this movement. Put a good 214 or 218 cell under the clip of the meter, positive side down. Turn the selector switch on the meter to cell test to see if it is a good 1.35 volt cell. Then turn the switch to off. Next, plug the block attached to the Accutron meter leads into the notch of the movement holder. Make sure the side contact wires are touching the edge of the movement slot and the center wire is touching the metal pad in the cell hatch.